Welcome back to another PowerPoint VBA tutorial. So today was kind of special. I was actually going to go over the Interactive Broker API a little bit more, but for whatever reason, it does not appear that their server is currently up. So I was trying to access the API from both my work laptop and my own personal laptop. For whatever reason, I can no longer access it. When I was reading some of the logs, it seems to be, I'm hoping, maybe something related to the actual certificate that goes along with that server. So I think there might have been an update on Microsoft Edge where if the certificate is no longer valid, it will kick you out and it will not redirect you. And so at least from what I was reading in the logs, that appears to be the case. I must spend a little bit more time on it to kind of understand exactly maybe how to fix it. But that's kind of where I'm at with that right now. So until I get that fixed, I can't unfortunately continue that series. However, I do have some VBA topics that I do want to cover in the meantime. So today we are going to cover the PowerPoint presentation slide object. So the slide is basically like a slideshow. The thing is, slideshows can be a little bit complicated just because there's actually different layers to them. So when you're looking at them from a VBA perspective, you have to understand that while you might be able to access certain properties in one part of it, you might not be able to access those same properties in another component of it. So I'm going to do my best to kind of give you at least a general feel of what working with a slideshow would look like. And then depending on if people want to see more detail around this, I'd be happy to do another video where we kind of go into some more detail. But generally for this one, I would say this is just getting you kind of comfortable with working with a slideshow object and kind of its different components. So with that being said, let's get started. All right, so if you haven't already, you want to make sure that you have your developer tab open, and then you want to go up here to your Visual Basic icon. Now, if you haven't already, you will also want to make sure to insert a new module. So you just right click down to insert and module. And then from here, we just need to start declaring some of our object variables. So we will call this sub control slide show. And from here, we're going to declare some object variables. So these are just going to be representing different objects inside of our PowerPoint presentation application. We do plan to work with a presentation object, albeit very simply. So we do need a presentation object. So we're going to create a PPT pres variable, and that will represent a presentation object. Additionally, we will have a slide, at least if I remember correctly, we're going to have a slide. And then from here, we're just going to be kind of showing you what you can do to navigate that slide. And then we're going to start moving into some of the actual slideshow components. So there is a object called slideshow settings. So slideshow settings will basically be things like, what slide do you want to start on, right? What color do you want your pen to be? What color do you want your, I don't know, what type of pointer do you want to use? Different things along that nature. I'm not going to go into every single one, but the idea behind the slideshow settings object is that this is where you can change the default settings for your slideshow. So it gives you more control from your end, where if you want to automate those settings, you can do so. Additionally, there is another object called PPT slide show, and then it's called window. Now, this one is just a slideshow window. And so this is an actual window object. And what we can do with that window is we can get information about it. We can get its size, we can get its height. And then there's actually an object that lives inside that slideshow window. For the most part, it's a pretty simple object. Most of the things you're kind of just reading. You're not necessarily doing anything with it, but it is an object you have access to. Okay, and then we're going to have the slideshow navigation. So this is actually a slide navigation object. And so this one is basically defining whether you want to have that slide navigation object part of your slideshow. That's at least kind of how I like to think about it. And then finally, we're going to have something called a slideshow view. And so this one is, I would say, kind of one of the more meatier objects. So there's a lot you can actually do with this object in terms of I don't know, behavior. Again, we're not going to go through every little thing, but generally thinking, I guess, down the road is when you're wanting to kind of customize that actual view, the one that the user is seeing, it's more than likely going to be through this particular object. Okay, so now that we've done that, we want to grab the active presentation. So we're going to set PPT_pres equal to our active presentation property, and this will return the active presentation as an object. Okay, now that we have our active presentation, we can grab the slideshow settings object. So basically, anytime we want to access a slideshow, we have to think about it from a presentation perspective, right? So everything's going to kind of start at that presentation level, and then from there, we can start going deeper and deeper into our wonderful object. So from here, you'll see that there is a slideshow settings. You'll also notice there's a slideshow window. So lots of different components. To be completely honest, this is something I'll probably go a little bit more in detail, maybe on my own, and maybe update some of the documentation you find on GitHub, just because you'll be surprised. There's certain functionality that actually is not built into the VBA object model. So there's certain things where even though manually you can do that on PowerPoint, you can't actually replicate that behavior using VBA. And I'll talk a little bit about that when we get there. Okay, so we have our slideshow settings object. What are some things that we can do with it? Well, one is we can specify the starting slide. So this is basically saying, what slide do you want to go on? Now, you do have to be a little bit careful when you start working with what I would call our smaller slides, just because what can happen is some of the information will actually not be, basically what will happen is you'll kind of exit the slideshow early. So you just got to be a little bit careful. 1 second, something's not working. Slideshow settings, PPT. Okay, there we go. But basically what happens is if you start the starting slide towards the end, and you do something where basically you don't set certain properties about it, and you were to say navigate forward, but you're on the last slide, the slideshow will actually exit. So there's certain behavior, again, you can do with the slideshow settings perspective where you can actually just loop towards the beginning. But if you don't set that property, and to say, maybe for example, you start your slide, at the last slide, and then you have somewhere else in your code where you go to the next slide. Well, it's not going to go back to the first slide. It's going to exit the slideshow. So just keep that in mind when you're working with this. Sometimes the actual starting point can impact whether your code works as expected. So here we're going to specify the starting slide. And then from here, we will do PPT. We'll also specify the ending slide. And so we'll do PPT slideshow settings. There is an ending slide property, and we'll have that be 3. Okay, and then from here, just a couple other things that you could do if you technically wanted to. You could have loop until stopped, and you could set that equal to true. So this is basically going to say, keep going until I exit the actual presentation. So just keep that in mind. If you keep this on, it will not exit automatically as it gets to the final slide. It will just go right back to the first one. So keep looping. So this could obviously be beneficial if you don't want to necessarily exit it. There's some other stuff too. So one of the things that I thought was kind of interesting is there is a pointer color. So you can actually specify the color of the pointer. And so here, for example, if I want it to be blue, I'll do 0, 0, 255. So change the pointer color. Very neat. And then we also have, there's some other stuff in here. I'm not going to necessarily set it, but there are things like show type, show with animation, slideshow name, starting slide. Well, we already talked about that one. Range type, named slideshow. So this is just saying whether it's named or not. And then there's some advanced modes. So there's definitely some interesting stuff you could do. You can also specify whether this one had animations with narrations, just different things. So I would say this is, again, just either setting some information about it or getting some information about it. You're not necessarily doing much with it. The only thing that you're going to do with your slideshow settings is just run it. That's basically all you're going to do. So to actually run the slideshow settings, we can just start it. So start the slideshow. This returns a slideshow window object. So we're going to set PPT slideshow window equal to PPT slide show settings. And then we're going to call that run method. So that run method will start the slideshow, and then it returns a slideshow window object. Now, with this particular object, there's not, again, much you're going to do with it, but there's stuff that you can find out about it. So if I want to work with that object, I could just use a basic with statement. So I could say with PPT slideshow window, and then end with, and of course I misspelled it. There we go. And so once I do that, I can see that there is a height property, there is a full screen property, there is a width property, and there is a top property. Now, I also do want to mention a few little things. I'm just going to print this out so we can see it. It's not going to be anything too fancy, but you'll kind of get the idea. Okay. There we go. So again, this is just going to print out some properties. So print out some properties about our slideshow window. Now, if you were looking right here for a second, you notice something? You can get the application object, you can get the presentation object, and there's also a slide navigation object as well. So there's actually other objects you can get from this one. And that's kind of like slideshow settings as well. There's other objects inside of it. However, this one I thought was a little bit interesting that you can go to the presentation level, and you can also go to the application level, and you also have this slide navigation level. So again, there's only one method, which is activate, but for the most part, it's really just kind of getting some information. So if I wanted, technically, I could say presentation and then set that equal to like a presentation object variable. And now I'm working with the presentation that belongs to that particular slideshow window. Now, I do want to talk about one object in there, just because I don't think we've talked about this one before, but the slideshow window object has a slide navigation object. Now, with this one, I think it's just a little bit easier to kind of see it. So we're going to set our PPT slide show nav equal to our PPT slide show window. And then there's that slide navigation property. So that has that object. I do want to make it visible. So let's make it visible. Okay, so we're going to take that object. We're going to call the visible property and set that equal to true. Okay, let's see what happens. Slideshow settings. Got an extra T up there. Oof, God, no, this is all wrong. There we go, I think. So normally this is what happens. I mean, I don't know how it's impacting you guys, but technically right now, everything is now that slideshow navigation. So this is when we turn it on, right? So this is when we turn it on. Now, if I run it again, but I keep it false, guess what happens? You're just not going to see that. Now, again, it's going to put it in the back, but you notice how we don't have that black pane anymore? It's because we didn't turn on that slideshow navigation. So if you want that available, you would just set that equal to true. So that's all you need to really know about that one. All right, let's keep going. Okay, so now assuming we have this slideshow window, what can we do with it? Well, we can grab the view property, which also returns a slideshow view object. So if I grab the view property, it returns a slideshow view object. And so we're going to set that ppt slideshow view variable equal to ppt slideshow window, and I'm going to call that view property. So now I have that object, I can start working with it. And some things that I might want to do with it is I can actually turn on my laser pointer if I want. So for example, I can do ppt slideshow view. There is a laser pointer enabled. By default, it's false. If you set it equal to true, it will enable it. And we want to make sure that's equal. Enable the laser pointer. Notice how it's here. Now, I do want to kind of mention something about this particular object. So it's deceiving because if you go to slideshow, that part of the tab, or sorry, that part of the ribbon, and you go to set up slideshow, you'll see certain options. So these are normally the options that we set from that slideshow settings object. You'll notice here that they have a laser pointer color. There's a problem with this. You cannot technically access that, at least from what I can tell, from the VBA object model. So even though manually you can set it, there does not appear to be a way to access that functionality from VBA. So especially with the slideshows, there seems to be some functionality that we cannot access because that's not the only one. The other one is zooming. So you cannot actually zoom in to a specific slide using the VBA object model. So even though manually I can do it in my slideshow, the VBA object model does not allow me to do it. So just keep that in mind. Don't run yourself in circles where you're trying to make something work that's just, you can't make it work. There's just no way of doing it. So just be weary of that when you're working with it. Sometimes you might not be getting the result you're expecting simply because it doesn't exist. So yeah, that's using a laser pointer, so that enables it, but I might not want a laser pointer. So for example, up here, I specified that whatever pointer I choose, I want it to be blue. Well, we realize we can't change the laser pointer, but I can have my slideshow have a pen, right? So I can set the pointer to be a pen. So I will just do ppt slideshow view. There is a pointer type object, or sorry, property, and then you can specify which one you want. So you can have arrow, auto error, arrow, eraser, always hidden. I want pen, so I'm going to do pen. And then usually what I like to do, I just turn that off. I don't really want anything kind of going on behind the scenes. So if I run it now, let's see what we get. So it might be hard to see, but you notice, oh, I got a nice little blue pen that I can write. So I can say hi, you know, all that fun stuff, right? So this again is just letting you know that you do technically have that functionality inside the object model if you want it. Okay, so now that we've done that, let's talk a little bit more about navigation, right? So how do we navigate slides inside of our slideshow, right? So that's actually pretty straightforward. I think naturally kind of once you start looking at the methods available, it kind of becomes pretty obvious like what you can do. So for example, I can, what is it? There is a next property. So this will take me to the next slide. So I can say, go to the next slide. I can go backwards. So this is PPT slideshow view, and then that is the previous method. So previous basically means go backwards, and then go to the first slide, PPT slideshow view, and then there is a first. And then there is also go to the last slide. So PPT slideshow view, and there is a last method, right? And additionally, just so you're kind of aware, this one's kind of interesting. They have some where there's properties that will say, hey, have you actually made it to the last slide? So that might be advantageous. You can specify go to slide, so you can specify which slide. You can say go to click count, index. Lots of different kind of things that if you want to do, you could obviously do. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of switch these ones. I'll put last there. And then I'll go back to my first. So let's see what happens. Kind of hard to see technically a little bit because it's one of those things. I think it's just a little bit harder to kind of see it, but you can see that we went back to the first slide. Now, also, if we wanted to, we can exit the slideshow. And so this one is pretty straightforward as well. We would just call the exit method. And then now you can see that I've exited it. Again, just kind of some warning, if you don't want to run around in circles. So say, for example, I don't specify my ending slide and I turn this off, right? And then I do something like that, right? Well, let me see this last. See, now it's going to work because that's what happens. I think also too, maybe I didn't specify. Yes. So sometimes you have to go back and set the properties. If I put this to, or maybe I was wrong and it doesn't matter. Oh, you know what it is? I think it's because this one I didn't set to false, so it's still maintaining that property. So that kind of makes sense. But what I'm trying to demonstrate is, well, maybe it doesn't. I don't know. Well, I had one thing where basically what would happen is if I specified one and then I tried exiting it, like I tried basically navigating back to the last slide, or like if I did like next, it would just automatically exit. And so, I guess that would kind of be what it is, but yeah, it would just get some weird behavior. And then I always kind of felt like I had to restart PowerPoint to kind of get it fixed again. Again, I don't know if that was maybe it was just something was off about PowerPoint when I opened it. So maybe it was just a one-time thing, but I don't know, maybe keep an eye out for it. I mean, if you experience it, obviously, then all I'm probably going to say is it's probably this, and it's probably something that you set here. If you don't encounter it, then that's even better. That means basically you didn't have to worry about it. So with that being said, though, that does kind of wrap up this video. So if you have any questions kind of about, slideshow objects, if you want to basically see more things covered about it, I'd be more than happy to do a video on it. Just kind of give me some ideas of what you're looking for and stuff like that. And then maybe I can, whip together a nice video and then we can kind of cover it in more detail. Other than that, we will see you in the next video.